Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's event, which is Brown Bodies, White Lives. Khalil Guliwala over here. We got Sangheetha Parthasarathy over here. There's a lot going on in the world and so much impact on our bodies, and so Sangheetha, I want to talk about it. Sangheetha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, Khalil. Great to be here. I think we met on the BIPOC Manager podcast and, you know, um, really loved our conversation and then really looking forward to Brown Bodies, White Lands. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. I work with developmental trauma, nervous system healing, and trauma healing for Indian bodies, specifically first generation Indian immigrants. I typically tend to work with women, who are like founders or execs. I do work with some men as well, and building my own body of work called South Asian Somatics. So I'm very happy to be here and talk.
Amazing. And I think maybe we can talk about why we kind of set up this event, right? So, I mean, part of it was sort of just so much change in the politics, so much of what's going on with our bodies and lives.
Mhm.
What's your take on kind of what's going on right now, Sangeeta?
Yeah, I think these are extraordinary times. I think these are
Mm,
unprecedented times. And a lot of it, in Tamil, there's a saying called Andathu Kottadu Pindam. That means that whatever is in the world, your body reflects it, and I think it's very, very true, especially today, because I think geopolitically, we're seeing so much of change and strife and uncertainty. And it's very, very hard. I think it's becoming increasingly hard to exist in this family bubble
mm,
where there's all of that happening on the outside, and then we can still stay connected and relational to one another, especially with our own selves and our own bodies. So the call, I feel like, I call it the epidemic of disconnection.
mm,
And, we are disconnecting to thrive, or even to survive, it feels like.
yeah.
And, the polarized nature of our worlds are definitely finding echoes within our own bodies and our own parts, as well as our loved ones. And increasingly, I think it's very, very hard to keep the world away from our, you know, personal bubbles.
Yeah. What you're saying, it resonates with me because I think so much of how, like, especially if you're like the other, the minority, and you mentioned female South Asian executives, in some sense, you're living your entire life judged through your body. Your body defines, your skin tone, your gender, and then living in a place that, you mentioned the previous when we did a podcast, was that if someone's living in a brand new surroundings, they're living in a brand new environment. Like their body is changing, the environment is changing, the nervous system is changing, and their own relationship to their own body is changing vis-a-vis the culture around them. And so please, yeah.
Absolutely. And to add another layer to it, we have three times as many microorganisms in our body as we have cells. So we can
Okay.
think of us as not just cells with some microbes, but like
Okay.
microbes with cells, right? And so these microbes are interacting with all of us, right? So the gut, the everything. So then when you move environments, there is, the rerootedness of the mind and rerootedness of the emotions and the culture, but it's physical in so many more ways, including just going to a brand new microbial environment
Mm,
and how that interacts with your body and your gut and your brain and, informs all of that, right? So I think rerootedness, moving from one place to another, is a significant event on the nervous system, no matter if it happens with choice, no matter if you're moving there for greener pastures, right?
yeah.
Not all of it is bad, by the way, right? It's not
Mm,
all traumatic, but I think we underestimate the depth of what that change actually means.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
especially when you talk about like microbes, it's so tell me, so you talk about how like the two kind of microbes, and I always think of bacteria. Is there anything more than bacteria, or is it sort of, or is it kind of three types of bacteria that kind of make us up?
it's bacteria and more, right? Okay, maybe I am going to get a little geeky here, but it it starts from birth. It starts from in utero, actually, the seeding of that microbial world of ours. It happens through birth and the process of birth itself, and the immediate, what happens, who do we come into, and what world it is, and that sort of seeds the lines the gut, as it were, and then the feeding and the responsive behaviors play a role in shaping all of that, and then the gut, of course, influences immunity, intelligence, emotions, and much more. So that's why we call it the second brain. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, coming back to your question about bodies and how you're right. I think when you live in a place where not everybody looks like you,
Hmm.
and there is a very visceral set of things that are going on in the visual cortex, the this auditory cortex, right? The way you're speaking, the everything. I think there's research about how how they everybody looks the same kind of thing, and there's actually
Yeah.
research that says that when you look at people that are like not your race, you don't pick up those specific you're less
Hmm.
likely to recognize the individuals
Yeah.
versus your own, somebody that looks like you, or the environment that you grow up in. Like, I
Yeah.
suppose if you grew up in a multicultural environment, then that's a little bit different. But all this is to say that yes, I think the body is very much a part of it,
Yeah.
and plays a big role in, I think, how we show up, but also how we think we should show up.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's never been so important as it is now. I think it's we're living in a world where there's a lot of stuff about identity and belonging and othering and polarization of
Yeah.
views, and I feel like it's making it increasingly hard for us to have nuanced opinions about anything at all. I feel like, what's it like for you? I think, what are you seeing in this
Yeah.
space, especially with, for example, the US elections and Trump and
Yeah.
the
I
diaspora?
Yeah, I think it's, it comes back to the point about bodies, right? Because for a lot of us, names matter, bodies are kind of, it's something signaling like you're the other, you're someone maybe who isn't part of that inner circle. But what's fascinating is when I, talking to different people, so my background's I'm Gujarati Indian, is there isn't, even take the US elections, there was a almost an equal percentage who were Republicans who did vote for Trump and those who were for Democrats. And I think what's happening right now is maybe there's an assumption that if you are a certain color background, you'd automatically maybe support a certain party. I think it's a moment to realize it's actually just almost there's that diversity within those bodies. Some people can actually be for politics. I think there's this moment of almost if I call it reckoning, where communities themselves said, what does it mean that parts of the community don't want to kind of vote, as a block or want to what used to be called as referred to as the ethnic block vote. And there's actually dissension within there. So I think that even their body itself right now is trying to understand itself politically. The fact that you wouldn't just maybe have to just default vote Democrat, but also you could vote Republican or conservative or all other kind of parts of the political spectrum.
Yeah,
And
and I
so on.
suppose you can also layer the gender piece. And then the class piece, I feel like, is a big piece as well. And I feel like I don't know, like in 2016, I knew a fair few. I mean, if you just drove through New Jersey back then, there were a lot of Indian cars with Trump stickers on it, right?
Well,
Back then. And, this thing about taxes and class and,
yeah,
really, I don't want to pay more taxes and those sorts of things, right? So, like, I think, and then yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot of division there, but how do you navigate? I mean, I think, the repercussions, like, see, family WhatsApp groups are one thing,
hmm,
but, when you meet up for holidays like Diwali and Thanksgiving and Christmas, things like that, how do you really, what do you, I mean, how do you, I mean, does politics, like, is that a
Mm.
thing? Does that come up? And,
Yeah.
how do you navigate it?
It's interesting 'cause this is more with you mentioned Thanksgiving. So right now we just had American Thanksgiving. King Thanksgiving was earlier this year. But more and more what I'm seeing again is that there's this, I call it almost like a fracture happening because you're right, like it's not just one element, it's not just the bodies, it's the gender, it's the class. And so, there's always a lot of, also like cultures are very patriarchal, like most Indian culture is, the sense where, you're the woman, you shouldn't express yourself, you should vote as the man does. But I think in some very strong way, there's almost this voice coming up of saying, no, actually, wait, we moved here for have equal rights for everybody, equal rights for our kids, our sons and our daughters. And so, at least within the household, from the few comments I had with friends, there's this sort of movement within it to say, the freedom that society guarantees me outside the house should be the freedom of speech I experience within the house. And
Yeah,
I'm seeing that
yeah,
movement taking place, especially from mothers. Mothers, I see more and more, like, talking more and more, saying, hey, no, no, wait a second, we should be talking about what our own views are, not just follow the views of society. I
yeah.
think that's the change. So, what
How
are you
do
seeing your
you,
side?
you're right, but how does it, it is echoing in the household as it
Yeah.
should, and uh, not just about, I think, voting for different parties as a couple, right? It's
Yeah.
not just that, right? I think it's it has an impact on everything, it feels like, right? Like I
Yeah.
know, for example, Indian dads with daughters, and I don't know if that's a factor or not, but just the story, right, of somebody who voted Trump in 2016 didn't vote for Trump this time, right? So I think there's this
Mhm.
that, and I think it comes down to, in intimate relationships, especially couples. So let's maybe start there about how this comes up is, I think, in an Indian marriage uh, that is, happening outside of India, for example, right, in the West, there is a lot of pressure to be American at work and Indian at home,
Yeah.
right? And that's that dichotomy where a lot of people in marriages, right, sort of live in that cognitive dissonance, right? So you will see, you know, um, women and men, right, leading DEI efforts at work, very particular of being seen as, all for equality,
Mm.
advocacy, etc. at work, come in and either not see what's happening at home
Yeah.
or make peace with it, right? Like, so the good enough marriage, like this is, traditional gender roles at home, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily if both of
They're
the
okay. Yeah.
people are okay with it, right? Like,
Mm.
but it's not, right? It's not just that. It's the
Yeah.
bitterness, it's the resentment, it's the, once you have kids, it's about, the husband not standing up for the wife or drawing boundaries with the, it's more
Yeah.
than that, right? Like, so I think there is the, what I see in Trump and what I see in the outside world about power and explicit platforming of problematic behavior and
Yeah.
people with problematic behavior, right? And then it gets a little dark about powerlessness, especially if when this, yeah, I mean, there is one thing about gender, but then there's also platforming of sex offenders, trigger warning,
Yeah.
and then that hits a very raw note, right, in
Yeah.
even in intimate relationships, because you are looking at Indian women who have moved to the West in search of safety, and these are women outside the house in positions of power, running
Mm.
multi-million dollar programs, all for DEI, still having to come home, and a big part of them goes unseen and unnoticed,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
gender divide of what she grew up with. There is still, unfortunately, women of my age who grew up in environments where, as when they were born, there was gender disappointment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That they were the
And
wrong gender. There are still women that I work with who are ashamed of and having to hide this story of being rituals being performed to ceremonially give the daughter away at birth because
Yeah.
it was what do you call it, auspicious
Yeah.
to for that
Yeah.
child, for that star or whatever
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is, right? Now, these are deep wounds and deep scars that never go away, right? We mask it with overachievement. We mask it by saying, I will be 10 times, wealthier than my
Understand.
male cousins.
Yeah.
So you'll validate my, very existence. These are very deep, hard, heartbreaking things that
Yeah.
we have to cognitively dissociate from, right? About my culture. Like I spent a lot of years pretending like that didn't exist in my culture, or that
Mm.
it didn't exist in my own home, because it's too painful and it's too
Mm.
shameful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's too deep. And so we sort of pretend it doesn't exist, but it keeps coming up, right? It's not what you don't see and what you don't acknowledge
Mm.
creeps up into your intimate spaces, right? It
Yeah.
creeps up into, and when you see explicit male privilege being played out like that in the in political spheres, right? Explicit sort of, not even a privilege of all aspects, it triggers that hopelessness and helplessness in that intimate space, right? It's like, what does it
Yeah.
mean here when something goes unseen, when something goes unacknowledged, right? And that's fine for the outside world, right?
Yeah.
To see the woman as a leader and as strong, and as Indian women as representing India, and how
Mm.
it's all amazing. But then in your intimate space,
Yeah.
there are still wounds that she carries and he carries, and there is a need for acknowledgement there, right? When that comes up, and I think that's where it really comes to a head. Like, do you see all of me?
Mm.
And it's the same thing with men, right? Because in patriarchy, there is the story of that being, yes, it's male centric and there's male privilege. However, it's brutal for men in the following way, is that they are being, you know, it's being treated as ATMs, right? Like it's
Yeah.
the dad, but the minute the dad retires, he's no longer the head of the family, right?
Yeah.
So the eldest son, or whoever is the earner and who's going to take care of them or whatever,
Mm.
gets the pride of place, right? It's
Yeah.
not being seen as a whole human, right?
Yeah.
And for some reason, if that older son, let's say, is, I don't know, neurodivergent, handicapped, whatever reason,
Yeah.
does not fulfill the ceremonial role of the patriarch, right?
Yeah.
Refuses to play that role,
He
even
moves on.
women and everybody in the family will unceremoniously take him out of it and install a new patriarch, because
Yeah.
that's a role as opposed to a person, right? So it's being
Yeah.
objectified like that for men to, and this is what men don't understand, is patriarchy also harms men.
Yeah.
So, right, so it's like when one gender wins, both genders lose, right? You
Yeah.
can't have, yeah, exactly. So that overt privilege, or something that the male gets anointed to or installed in, is very crippling for the male, right? Because it's still being anointed for a reason, right? Like
Yeah.
it involves the sacrifice of the self, right? For example, we know this, if that eldest son, who's the future patriarch, will be groomed for that role,
Mm.
right? And now if he marries somebody outside the religion or outside the caste, that's it, right? He's
Yeah.
ceremonially,
But
unceremoniously thrown
yeah.
out, and a new person is installed to that role. They don't
Yeah.
care. Women do it, right? It's not just men. Women do it too for their own, protection, right? So
Yeah.
women often are the torch bearers of patriarchy, right? You see in like, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the Indian like context, and it applies to all contexts. Like the man will be the CEO who will say this is what needs to be done, but the COOs, the women, are the executors of patriarchy inside families, right? And they are perpetrators of lateral violence, right? Women on women
Mm.
violence is very real in workplaces as well as in our homes, right?
Mm.
So we don't, at workplaces, it's a big thing, right? I work with so many women who, I see it two ways, right? For Indian women who have just, made it to leadership positions, I tell you this, like I was terrified the first time I started leading teams. I was terrified of being the woman who would put down other women for her own, of being the
Yeah.
mother-in-law, as it were, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The Indian mother-in-law who would, the stereotype,
Attack.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
right? Who would bully the daughter-in-law, right? You're terrified of that because now that you have power, you're like, I don't want to be the perpetrator, right?
Yeah.
Because we're so used to looking at power as 0 or 1. It's like, oh, if there's an ultimate power, he's the bad guy, the perp, or I should be zero, the victim, and hence, right? Or the
It's
savior,
one or the other.
right? But I, I, I
Yes, sir.
think, I mean, going back to what the election has done for our bodies and in our intimate relationships, especially marriage, like,
Hmm.
long-term partnerships, is that I think in couples with good enough relational,
Yeah.
intimacy, there is a tenderizing effect that this has had on couples,
Yeah.
right? For both the man and I'm talking about an Indian marriage, right? An Indian
Yeah.
immigrant, first generation
Yeah.
marriage. In in couples where there is good enough uh, connection,
Hmm.
good enough attunement, there has been a sort of let's turn towards each other. Now
Yeah.
we need to stick closer together, right? And there's I call it like the tenderizing effect. It
Yeah.
has tenderized hearts a little bit and it's sort of softened and brought them closer for some. For some, it's just
It's
been
tough.
soul crushing, that just,
Yeah.
you know, this is
And
not it, you know?
and and I think that's why like there's so much here, but like the I keep thinking about this family friend of mine. And he both again Indian and moved here in like I think like the early 90s. The wife became very, very successful and the man not as much. And I'm gonna butcher the Hindi, but he was like, "Hisat nahi hai." It's like I don't even have the honor anymore of kind of being her equal. And he said it in a funny way, but I
Yeah,
know there's some kind of pain behind that because he knows when he was at an Indian function with, the whole, network of people, he's now, it's like, oh, why isn't he as successful as his wife? I wish he was successful than him. Why is he letting her go outside the house and do all these things? And these are being spoken by other professionals, right? These are
yes,
being spoken. So there's this weird kind of dynamic where you're right, where it's like, patriarchy isn't this thing that, I mean, there's this thing where it affects everybody, but it's also kind of, I think, constrains men in these roles. The ATM role, like you mentioned, where he's trying
mm-hmm.
like what are his options? Have his wife not be as successful as she can be, reduce the whole and stop her from doing something she enjoys and loves for what? For honor? And I know stories of men who've done that. Again, it's like it's so common, hearing from my wife, her friends, people where her boyfriend or someone's husband is essentially negging her, essentially saying to her, why are you trying to be successful? Why are you trying
Yeah,
to do so much? As opposed to pushing, like if the reverse had been said for men, people are like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't you want him to be successful? But there's this
yeah,
weird imbalance where patriarchy means somewhere for him to feel comfortable in the society, he's got to convince her, who's another economic agent, to not try to leverage and get ROI. It is so messed up, I find.
yes, yeah. And you know, equating your entire worth, self-worth to a paycheck, right? It's
Yeah,
heartbreaking, right? Because what happens if you're burnt out and you really want to take a break? And this is the other thing, right, that I'm seeing in like the modern Indian marriage is I do see, because after a point, for example, right, this is going, right, her career is taking off. And again, my world might be a little bit skewed because like, I don't know, but I am seeing these examples. But I'll tell you this, right? It's when you have kids and there are demands, and at some point, one person's career is just skyrocketing, and then the other person's like, no, I want to be the primary caregiver, right? And if that happens to be a male, and I know my friends were in that role, right? Um, I feel like they feel very, I know that they feel very, very alone because guess what? I mean, there are no role models or support systems, no matter what ethnicity you are, but especially if you're Indian, right? Like, how
yeah,
many, like, hey, let's catch a coffee after drop off, right? how many dads do you think are there anyway in any it's still, and I'm talking about like California, New York, London, right? Like where
Yeah.
it's the heart of liberal town,
Liberalism.
right? I'm
Yeah.
not talking about Chennai, right?
Yeah.
So but even then it is the dads go through, the dads who choose to be stay-at-home dads who I know, or the primary caregivers, right? So they
Yeah.
have the more flexible job and they've not gone after promotions in like 5-10 years when the kids are growing up because
Yeah.
her career is taking off or whatever it is, right? Or he genuinely wants to slow down and be there for the kids and not miss them growing up. And again, in good enough marriages, it makes the marriage, intimate and stronger. But in a lot of marriages, it doesn't make up for um, good enough support system for the primary caregiver, no matter who it is. That's my point, right?
Yeah.
So just as women who slow down or go part-time or go freelance or become entrepreneurs or stay-at-home moms
Mm.
after the kids come, feel a profound sense of loneliness, not good enoughness, not enough people who can really see them and bond with them. And it's a lonely place to be, right? Caregiving roles, because there is
Yeah.
no promotion. They're not promotable roles in that sense, right?
Yeah.
And the ROI comes much later, right? And so these roles, because we're living in this capitalistic rat race, nurturing and caregiving roles, although they are the most important roles, are consistently devalued and undervalued, no matter who
Mm.
performs the role.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, even if you're in your marriage there is equality, and the one of you has decided to step down or stay at home or slow down and doing a non-promotable role, let's say, the person who does that needs support and care as they're doing that role, because that role is bloody hard, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're a male doing that role and you're an Indian male doing that role, and you're an
Yeah.
male immigrant doing that role,
Yeah.
who do you have to lean on? Where are your buddies? Like very few. You'll get, some of my friends have like that one or two people, like, that
Yeah.
really like get it and
Yeah.
support them. But a lot of them really struggle with mental health issues because it's a lonely place to be.
Yeah. To your point, and I'll share this. What you said, because like I was talking to somebody and said, I'm trying to parent my kids in a way I never saw, in a way I was never parented. Like, even looking for me as role models as a kid, I never saw father figures growing up that I said, man, I want that father. I remember watching TV and American TV and saying, I want that father. That father shows up, nice to the kid, hugging their kid, supporting their kid, talking nicely. And I wonder if maybe there's this almost like a lost generation of us, and I'll consider myself part of it, who are trying to figure out what does it actually mean, not just in an idea, not in a way, not no longer just in our brains, but in our lived activities in our bodies. How are we the kind of fathers that we always wanted to be? And maybe the generation after that that actually has role models at least they can pick up on or pick pieces of.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And it's like a little sad, right? That you've had to look up at TV to like
Yeah,
pick it up, right? It's really sad. And that's, again, it's sad, but also common, right? Even when we do this work, there's this idea of how would you have liked to be held? A
yeah,
lot of them, are struggle to find out like actual people, and then we'll do imagination and, bring it in and all of that. But it's really sad that you're right. I mean, we don't have enough role modeling. We didn't have men who want to do better and who want to break out of the patriarchy, really do not have role models. And guess what? Sometimes the marriage has taken such a hit that it's hard for the spouse to be tender, right? So you're caught in that bitter, resenting kind of loop, right? And then
yeah,
when you try, it feels like it's not enough because it keeps you keep getting stuck in the loop a little bit because we've forgotten how to turn towards each other,
yeah,
and stay relational with each other, because this patriarchy can, man, fuck up a marriage, like, right?
yeah,
It can take a huge toll on the marriage. And you know what? The sad thing is that is we think that, oh, we're not overtly fighting like our parents, and we're not that, and we're not this, and the things that we accept, right? Of, oh,
mm,
we're, oh, but the so and so is a great parent, and we're gonna coast, or we're gonna,
mm,
sort of just, do our thing and be transactional. But that's, your children know that, right? Like their bodies pick
yeah,
up on it, their nervous systems pick up on it. And you know, no, I mean, I think we've got to do, I think the people that really wanted to have better marriages than our parents did, not in money terms, not in who does more Instagram reels terms,
Yeah,
right? It's not a performative thing, right? Oh, I said
yeah,
I wished I made a cute reel for her birthday. It's not that, right?
yeah,
But this fundamental aspect of putting each other first and turning towards
yeah.
each other and being tender towards each other, and that couple bubble,
Well,
I think it takes a big hit with when you've grown up around patriarchy, and then you come to the West, and you thought you've escaped it, etc. And the
yeah,
women have, when they go to work, right, because they do get promoted, right, they do I mean, they're leaders and all of that, but then you have the socio-political shitstorm that's going on.
yeah.
And then man, it's really hard not to bring it home, right?
Yeah, and I think more also the questions of sort of generations, right? So I think I look to like the Irish communities, Italian communities, Greek, Polish, who've been 4 or 5 generations, like a long time. They still have the hyphenated, but they're American first, Canadian first, North American first. I think of Indians, this is maybe a third generation over here, maybe fourth if you stretch it. But at some time, there's going to be in my mind some kind of like a separation, some kind of thing where they will still like their values be more and more guided by where they are, and they won't, in some sense, their gaze will turn away from looking towards India or the motherland as sort of a place for all source and value, or even value, maybe the right word, but the gaze will turn more towards the society they're currently in. Any
Yeah,
are you seeing elements of that or something different?
yeah. So it's a very interesting thing, right? What happens when your identity is threatened and you're on shaky ground, which a lot of, like I said, right? Because the healthy male bonding rituals are gone. Even in India, right? All you see is on TV and movies is men just getting drunk and then crying about their ex and then spewing
Yeah,
hate against their ex and singing like violent songs and then just getting into fights, right? That's your ideal male, come on.
yeah,
So we've really lost in the Indian culture, the deeply important male bonding rituals, right,
yeah,
which we had, and religious or not, these were bodily movements, right? You'd have your wrestling, you'd have your
yeah,
drumming, you would have your dancing, religious, places in which, and some of these expeditions, religious or non-religious, were men only,
yeah,
where there was older men, right, who would signpost younger
yeah,
men. It was a very beautiful, safe container which existed in all cultures, you know, which I think, systemically we've just dismantled all of that, right? So I think the Indian male is fundamentally in crisis, right? In a way that the Indian female is also in a different way. But my point is, when you then reroute and your fundamental everything is threatened and you're on shaky ground, and then you see a partner doing so well and not being bound by pain, all of that, the instinct is to hold my privilege very close, right?
yeah,
So I've known so many men who really did not give two hoots about religion or anything like that when they were here, going and holding it very tight together, right, very close to them. So your point about the gaze, right, at some point you've got to shift away
yeah,
from looking at your motherland as this, oh, nostalgia, whatever, and see, I mean, take the good bits, but also see it
yeah,
for what it is, but also then shift and hold like dual awareness, right? It takes confidence to do that. And when your entire confidence has the way that it's been taught to you is predicated on essentially you being an ATM, right? And
yeah,
you know, um, the privilege and how it's all the unconscious things that you've taken for granted, which are now coming under the microscope,
yeah,
you'll want to hold something very dear, which gives you the pride of place, right?
yeah,
And so I don't. I also and men. I don't know this. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but this may have changed now. But I'm talking about 20 years, 30 years ago, when two people, a male and a female, immigrate at the same time, the female mainstreams into the society at a far faster rate than the male in terms
Yeah.
of trying new food, trying new music, getting multicultural friends, and just being open, right?
Mm.
Whereas I think they don't mainstream at that rate, I feel like, on an average. This may have changed now. I hope this has changed now with
Mm.
the Indian, like, men and women. But I don't know if you do you see that,
Yeah.
or is it just me?
I saw that. I saw cases where I think most cases where like the woman would kind of get into the mainstream better. But what's interesting was I noticed in most couples, at some point, one of them would say, I want to continue staying here, one would say, I want to leave. And then that would split a 50-50, meaning it wasn't always the man who said, I want to go back to India. Some of the woman who would say, even though she, went the experience, it says, I miss my family, I miss the culture, I miss all that. Some it's the man. So there's this
Yeah,
element
yeah,
where,
no.
they're accepting it and they're trying to kind of understand it better. And there was something I want to kind of pick up against you. Something you mentioned was about alcohol and TV. It's because something that I've noticed, especially with Indian communities, that the drinking has gotten alcohol abuse has it just keeps going more and more and more and more and more.
Yes.
And what's
Yeah,
interesting because in the West, I'm seeing, 20 years ago, if you went to a party and said, I don't drink, people would think of you were weird. Now it's like,
yeah,
with all the sober movements and all celebrities going
yeah,
sober and whatever, but that
yeah,
sober, but it's almost this, almost this insular notion within the community where it's like, if you want to stay sober or not drink, it's like, no, no, it's
yeah.
like this almost I've seen people force alcohol in almost a
Yes,
bullying, toxic manner. And I'm like, in a way
yeah,
that I see it very within the community here and not in others. Like,
yes,
are you noticing that as well?
yes, yes, absolutely. And I think it's mad right now in India, right? And like, Indians abroad is one thing, but Indians in India, oh God, yeah, the alcoholism is rampant, and in both men and women. I think the more economically, I won't say that. I think you see it in all economic, sections, and there are sections of women that are very fast becoming, alcoholics. That percentage, because it's historically been low, it's moving towards that, and then the drug problem is huge in India, I feel. Yes, so you're right. I do see that, and also I think, again, here I feel like when a group of these, middle-aged men get together and they do that, like in whatever gated communities, it's drinking to get drunk, which is
Yeah,
so weird, right? So if even if there's like a family type, like New Year, whatever parties, whatever, we've stopped going to most, yeah, all of it, because it's not the kind of, I'll have one drink in hand as I'm eating. It'll get so weird, and immediately, right, the men will be separate, the women will be separate, the women will be dancing separately, the men, and the goal is to get drunk, right, for
yeah,
and act like it. So it's a little bit, I don't know, why do you this is what, right? So for men, the story that they've internalized is, for men, for Indian men, the only allowed emotion when you're
mm,
sober is anger. You
yeah,
do not have access, you do not have emotional literacy.
mm,
It has specifically been sucked out of you by both the women and the men in your life from a young age, because you've been told, don't cry like a girl,
yeah,
just dust yourself off and go, don't be so sensitive, right? You're explicitly told not to have emotional literacy, right? So there's a big emotional literacy gap
yeah,
between the husband and the wife when they get married, right? Which gets in the way of parenting and responsive parenting, right? Sometimes. But also, alcohol gives you the license to cry and have access to all other emotions. Therefore,
yeah,
the women, the only way she can be emotionally intimate with her partner is when he gets drunk. So she gets him drunk to feel emotionally intimate with him, thereby
wow,
exacerbating the alcohol problem,
yeah,
right? And yeah, so when men drink, they drink to get drunk,
yeah,
right? And that's a license to act like an emotional adult, right?
yeah.
With all the range of emotions, which which they are not supposed to have otherwise, right? So
Yeah,
anytime you see them cry, anytime you see them vulnerable, because that's what they've learned from watching all these movies, right?
yeah,
Like man loses girl and he's all like
because
boom
drunk.
boom boom, I'll kill everybody, and then
Yeah,
friends get him drunk,
yeah,
uh, for him to cry and get over her, and then he
yeah.
sings a sad song. This is every movie ever, right?
That's Devdas. I mean, that's like which is the
Yeah.
core one, but almost every movie in there. Um, Sangita, I want to talk about you because and I know you're writing a book. Like tell me more about that.
I Yeah, I mean, I'm writing pieces from my
Okay,
heart, which will eventually be strung together.
okay,
But yeah, maybe I can read a little bit
please,
of
yeah,
it. Maybe,
definitely.
yeah. Let's Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about activism. What do you
Okay.
see, like in our community? Do you think activist or activism? Do you see a lot of that? Like, what's our relationship with advocacy or
Mhm.
activism? Do you think?
It's a trouble one. I'll say why, because I spent a lot of time trying to understand this. Because I've been in the nonprofit sector, I've been an activist, and what I noticed was for some people, for a lot of immigrant, let's take the Indian community. When they first come here, a lot of the places of center were the mosques, the temples, the gurudwaras. And when I talked to people, I said, what was the discourse within these places? And discourse was, don't care about the politics in these lands because these lands aren't even yours. The true land is the motherland. So they were in some sense told, don't even be politically involved. It doesn't matter. It's not even the real stuff. And then what happened was over time, but people are saying, wait a second, because they weren't politically active, because they weren't trying to tell their elected officials, here's what's important to us, they were ignored by the elected officials. Because if you're not going to show up and vote, why would an official, go and try to get your vote? But what's happened is now I find is that these communities are getting more and more open. They're actually realizing, wait, we need to actually say what is important to us as a community, as a group of people, especially in the face of racism, violence. Actually, is the main thing that's happened. The attacks in New Jersey that were happening, I think, in the last 2 years against Indian people. But where it goes half and half is because that advocacy to me is still very driven by class and society. It's still driven by
Mm,
this notion of like it's about protecting assets, it's about protecting capital, and it's less about actually let's just make sure that there's an equal distribution of the way we're being treated. So
yeah,
there's advocacy,
yeah,
but advocacy almost like, in the way that we talk about the Koch brothers, and have like there's a very conservative advocacy taking place, but really for the interest of a certain class of people. I find that
yeah.
happening even with all these religious groups or community groups. The Indians is it's still the advocacy is happening, but it's driven by class more than it's driven by, let's say, but rather than an umbrella trying to protect the entire community.
That's a very interesting observation. And how does it play in the corporate workforce, I wonder? Because as an Indian woman, I know how it plays out because there is this sort of almost, we take to it like fish to water, right? It's our whole,
Yeah,
story, and you can so resonate with it. And it's like, yep, I'm gonna take this on in one sense. But I think when Indian immigrant men do it, they're usually it is personal, right? Because if they had a neurodivergent son or daughter, then they might do something about diversity, right? Because they
yeah,
care about that. Or if they are gay and are struggling, then they might spearhead something like that, right? Let's say, right? I mean, intellectual slash learning, I've seen some sort of activism there, but I don't know that there are enough allies, or I don't know. How do you see it? Maybe they're not.
yeah.
I don't know. How do you
I
like,
don't.
or maybe it's sort of more day to day and
Yeah.
embedded in who they are and how they show up. Maybe that it's that. But
Yeah, I've been trying to think about that, and I think the best I've managed to kind of come so far is think of it as, we talked about how a patriarchal society treats men, doesn't always treat men the best way. And I think one of the things that most men have experienced at some point is how the world treats you when you're a poor man. Because when you don't have cash, when I walked into I had a job, I was painting rooms, and I walked into my bank. I was a client, I'm paying them money, and I had, clothes with paint on. And I was treated with such disrespect by people who essentially I was paying to hold my money. And one thing that maybe my belief is that for a lot of men, there's this awareness of, you know what? all that's happening in society, it's all just it's all just fluff. It's all based upon power and resource and who actually has true power. And I wonder if my theory is that for a lot of men, you get kind of resigned to it because you kind of look around you and says, do I have the power I need to really be safe? And the answer is you don't have that ultimate power. It becomes a yardstick in your head. You kind of just resign and say, all of this is all meaningless. You kind of just kind of brush everything aside. So it's not so much as you don't want anyone else to do it. You just kind of go, I just need to just focus on what I need to do, keep my head down, and get through the day. And
That's a very beautiful, observation. I think it's that whole thing about who am I going to protect when I'm in survival mode, something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, exactly. Because that's what you're
Yeah,
trying to do. You're and depending and again, it's not just Indian men, it's all men. You see how society treats you if you're poor, like if you stutter, like I stutter, so I got that. If you're overweight, if you're not a good-looking man, if you're disabled, LGBT, you start naming it on. And there's this element where you kind of say, like again, is that if society is putting together a certain model of a man as sort of being this ultimate thing that you need to be as patriarchal society, you look at that and you say, "Oh, I feel like a failed experiment." It's like that toy that was going off. There's something that's broken and needs to be thrashed aside. And that's the element where at that point you're trying to keep in survival because you don't just have society telling you that you're not good enough. You've internalized that, like a lot of people do.
absolutely. Oh
And
God, yeah. That
yeah,
just, it touched a very tender piece. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there is so much of shame, right? And I think one is patriarchy and capitalism work hand in hand, right? And
yeah, yeah,
they're and religion, right? All of these, organized, religion, right?
yeah,
Power and power centers, and capitalism. Just you're disposable, right?
yeah,
And I only care about you if you're productive, right? So therefore, if you're between 18 and 50 and you're contributing in GDP terms, right?
yeah,
Then you have the right to exist. Everybody else, you have to earn your keep is the basic motto of capitalism, which
yeah,
patriarchy co-ops into. However, if you look at Eastern cultures, everybody had a place in the society. Like you could just
yeah,
exist and be legitimate in your existence,
yeah.
no matter if you didn't have to earn your keep,
Hmm.
right?
Just
So we
just being.
went back to ancient society, like even in our societies, like 3 4, what my dad describes when he was growing up, right? He's 83 now, so when he was a boy, like this was like 80 whatever years ago, right? Maybe 100, like 80 to 100 years ago, right? The societies that like where he grew up, like an agrarian sort of household where it's a household and there are lots of people in it, right? So the widowed aunt will have a place, right?
Hmm.
So the epileptic uncle will have a place
Hmm.
in that family, right? And no one got left behind, right?
Yeah,
And what we call as mental illness in labels these days, right? Somehow everybody has had a place, right, in that
yeah,
society, in that community, and they were not sent away. So even if you look at mental health, until the colonization happened and the westernization happened and psychiatry came in, that's when mentally ill people were sent away from society to live in rehab centers or were confined in some way, right?
yeah,
But historically that was so like they still had a place. It's not that people put up with that, right? They had ways
yeah.
to sort of contain that, but they weren't abandoned necessarily, right? Like they somehow had a place somewhere in that village, maybe in the
Yeah.
fringes, maybe a little bit adjacent to mainstream, but
But there was a place there.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was having kids, I was a bit concerned, like what if, what would I do if they were handicapped in any way? How would I treat them? And I remember the doctor said, if your child ever born to handicap, the best thing you can do is to move to a small town. You go to a small town, go to a small village, go find something in Canada because they will live a much higher quality of life than if you're in the big city. And that element of people just watching out for each other.
Oh, that is just so beautiful. That's just, Gabor Mate, like
Mate.
he said something very similar. He said that, if you need a little bit extra, anyone in your family, right, need a little bit extra. I think that's something like what he said. He said your best bet is to go to a collectivist culture in a
Mm.
small village somewhere in a country or a culture that is collectivist, like village minded, because there is that inherent sense of um both contributing to and drawing from, and this is
Yeah.
my paraphrasing of that, right? Collective, what I call ventral well, right?
Mm.
So if I have a little extra, I contribute to it, but I can also, when I'm pregnant, when I'm breastfeeding, when I'm a little short, I can borrow from it, right? That
Yeah.
collectivist, and that it doesn't, it's fine. I'm not keeping count, people that have a little extra contribute a little extra to the pot, and then people that need it draw from it, right? And the focus is
Yeah.
on keeping the well stocked, rather
Yeah.
than who contributed what, because over a long period of time it evens out. Guess what? Your
Mm.
ancestors probably contributed a lot to that well,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then you come in and maybe your child needs a little extra, and then people are happy to contribute to that, because guess what? It evens out.
Yeah. Yeah. You take a penny, you leave a penny. Like little bowls.
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever the extra pennies are, right? Knowing that
Yeah.
it's going to be put to good use and that
Yeah.
I can draw from it when I need to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so would you be open to reading one of your essays?
Yeah, let's do that. The theater, this is called the Theater of Outrage.
Yeah.
Okay. So every week, women come into my practice, and this is true. I mean, this hopefully resonates with everybody, Indian or not, women or not. Every week, women come to my practice carrying the same weight, a perpetual state of activation, shoulders tensed against invisible threats, jaws clenched in constant readiness. They speak of exhaustion and yet cannot rest. They are caught in what I've come to realize as the theater of outrage, a performance that consumes both the stage and the performer. If you're silent, you're complicit. Neutrality supports the oppressor. I'm watching who posts and who doesn't. Your silence speaks volumes. If you have time to post about your dinner, you have time to post about injustice. These battle cries of modern activism echoing in their nervous systems, the body becomes a battlefield where perpetrator, victim, and savior dance in an endless dance. I watch them toggle between collapse when overwhelmed, rage when activated, and a desperate need to rescue when witnessing others' pain. And their nervous systems are locked in constant vigilance, scanning for the next crisis, the next cause, the next call to arms. The state of perpetual activation seeps into the most intimate of spaces. Partners report walking on eggshells, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Children learn to perform awareness instead of feeling genuine empathy. Simple joys become weighed with guilt. How dare we laugh when the world is burning? Dinner table becomes a tribunal. Rest becomes resistance, and love becomes conditional on political performance. The rescue and being rescued. This dance plays out in infinite loops. Today's savior becomes tomorrow's victim, desperately seeking another savior. We mistake this cycle for solidarity, this exhaustion for dedication, and this performance for progress. Social media amplifies the pattern, rewarding the most dramatic displays of indignation, while true intimacy and genuine connection wither in the shadows. In my practice, I see how this manifests in the body: chronic tension in the shoulders, the jaw from the constant defensive posturing, shallow breathing patterns from this perpetual fight or flight, digestive issues from unprocessed emotional charge, sleep disturbances from an overactive threat response. autoimmune conditions, difficulty being present in intimate moments, and the addictive nature of that savior role is particularly harmful. It masquerades as righteousness while feeding our need for significance. We become invested in others' victimhood to maintain our role as the rescuer. Our children learn to seek validation through performance rather than authentic connection. And our partnership become political battlegrounds rather than sanctuaries of genuine intimacy. This is the true cost of the outrage economy. Intimacy sacrificed on the altar of performance, rest branded as privilege, joy branded as betrayal, nuance dismissed as complicity, genuine connection replaced with political theater. The deep tragedy is how this perpetual state of activation actually undermines our capacity for sustained resistance. We mistake performance for power, reaction for revolution, and our nervous systems are caught in this endless loops of outrage, lose the capacity for that deep presence, that true solidarity, because that requires that we forget that lasting change requires more than the ability to react. It requires our ability to respond, to rest, to build, to nurture, and to sustain. So yeah.
Wow. There's so much. Obviously, you say you work in this, you work with your clients, but was there something that prompted you to take this topic and write about it?
Yes, because I think I have, my own my own stance, I think, right? Like, so I have been this angry feminist all my life, and I say feminist, and this sort of going to battle for somebody, this sense of overactive sense of rescuing and protection has been a theme in my own life. And then as my nervous system has changed, I have had to very, very tenderly explore why.
Okay.
And as I've softened, the quality of what I bring to my clients has also changed and evolved. And I feel like in India, it's like two things, right? One is like Indian women who live outside India, but also young people who now live specifically in India, right? There is this mindless consumption of Western outrage
Okay.
as an export without critically thinking about how it applies to your situation, right? And I've it's heartbreaking to see what this takes out of you, right? And
Yeah.
so I think there is a personal side to it, but also there is a professional side to it, because I feel like in my clients, there is a definite thread of what you beautifully described, right? As I don't feel big enough, right? I'm feeling small and I'm feeling like I'm still surviving, right? And then when you add the woman, the gender, the patriarchy, the early childhood, sometimes abuse, right? And it gets, more deeper and more complex. Is that the way that we come into a relationship with our children is through hypervigilance, right? To say,
Mm.
I'm not going to be that parent, or I'm going to make sure I protect. And sometimes when we're in protection, uh, we can't be in protection and connection at the same time, right? In the
Yeah.
nervous system, right? Because oxytocin is the love hormone, bonding hormone, right? That's the one that we require, and that gets produced when we're in very joyful connection with love, with our loved ones, right? And then adrenaline is the protection hormone, right? That's what gets produced when the system is feeling unsafe and is feeling threatened, right? Then it's producing adrenaline. The thing is, you can't have both at the same time. It's like a seesaw, right? So
Yeah.
if there is low oxytocin, there's high adrenaline, and vice versa. So our nervous systems are asking that we stand off and not be producing so much adrenaline all the time, that it impedes production of oxytocin, and then we can't stay intimate with anything,
Else.
including ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. No, it was just as you're reading Sangeeta, like, so much of, that's why, like, there's, I think that's what's been missing. And I think what you do so well is take all the different pieces together and bring them together. Someone talks about, let's call it, let's call it anxiety or whatever, but they don't talk enough about the body. They don't talk enough about hormones. They don't talk enough about gender. They don't talk about society, the culture, the movements, attitudes, families. And I found even, and again, you're doing it again even with that essay, is taking all these different pieces. Think of like stars and constellations. The stars exist, but you're kind of mapping up and saying actually they're all kind of together in some way. They all have relationships with each other. They all kind of influence each other. And so even there, when you talk about the outrage, the Western outrage and export, how many of us know people who are like, you're like, hey, wait, that's happening over there. Why are you getting worked up over here? In a very deep way, you
Yes.
know?
And the
And
performative nature of it, right? Like the
yeah,
whole, it's pretty grandiose, right? To think
yeah,
that, yeah, I mean, there's so much. I don't know, you see this in LinkedIn all the time, right? When we work with yeah, I mean, there are strong women, but also sometimes women think that we have to sort of be devoid of them, sometimes, right? It's the anger that sustains the high performance, and then
mm,
that becomes a problem, right? So we think that zero or one, right? The
yeah,
toxic masculinity that both men and women aspire for as leadership standards really consume us. Then we end up becoming the perpetrator, right? And sometimes
yeah,
we sort of have a chip on our shoulder, and then we're sitting there on this moral high horse, gatekeeping, activism, and gatekeeping, all those performances, right? And so I think in this last couple of years, there's been so much cry about, well, you're not crying about Gaza, and you're not crying about Sudan, you're not crying about that,
yeah,
and you're not crying about this, and I think we're sort of missing that point entirely. I think there is a place for all kinds of activism, right? But then I don't know. Sometimes we just, in this like performative nature of, especially social media, it's if
it's
you're silent, you're complicit, and you
yeah,
know all of that stuff, right? I feel like it's coming from a place of anger and adrenal fueled,
yeah,
which is not really contained, right? For you to be an embodied activist,
yeah,
right, you gotta from a nervous system standpoint, right, the sympathetic, which is the mobilization energy, right, that needs, if that's operating with enough ventral vagal like safety, then you're productive, right? But if I'm not within that range, that window of presence, and I lose connection with myself relationally, and I lose
mm,
connection with the outside world, then I'm fight or flight. I'm going to burn the world down kind of thing, right? And
yeah,
you know, that's not a sustained way for change for anybody, right? Because I'm no longer in
mm,
connection with my own self.
yeah,
And I've lost the ability to stay relational with anybody outside of myself. And then that's just
one
burnout
dimension.
land, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and as you're saying, maybe thinking what you said before is, how and this is, it went back to Indian men, but that same idea where the only emotion they've been given almost permission to express has been anger. And that anger is the only emotion they should be
You're
expressing.
absolutely right.
And
And
with
so for
outrage,
male
love,
anger, right? And so when
with
women,
anger.
you're right. You're right. So women think that if I'm powerful, I have to act like a male, and therefore I have to. The only approved emotion for me to perform to the outside world is also anger,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's a sign
Anger.
that I've made it, and that's a sign that
Yeah,
I have power.
yeah.
And so it's sort of almost like sort of turning it on its head, right? Which is that what is enoughness of power, right? It's not a zero or one. It's not that there is this and or and this goes for men and women as well, is I have any power in my body at all, it's I find it very hard to keep that power, because that means I'm the bad guy, remember the
Yeah,
perpetrator, right?
yeah, yeah,
Right. And so I find it hard to occupy spaces, right? And that's what
yeah,
I told about the guilt when I'm feeling joy,
yeah,
like, right, like what's privilege and what's just joy, you know?
yeah, yeah. On that note, Sangeeta, this has been a fun conversation.
Yes, I mean, if any of this resonates with you and you are an Indian immigrant, like I said, mainly women, but I have a lot of men that, sort of resonate with the work and, want to work. So if you're somebody that really gets this touched you at a very deep level, and, you want to find a way to explore all these themes as they're happening to you in your body, and you don't want to be fragmented anymore, right? To have this fragment for that piece and that fragment for that piece, and it's burning you out, and the cost of showing up is too much, and you've had enough of all of it, and you really want to sort of invest in fundamentally building capacity in your nervous system to sustain connection, with yourself, with people around you, so you can, in the most intimate of spaces, right, in that family oxytocin bubble, be able to have that deep sort of, I'm going to turn towards each other sort of. And men, are longing for it as much as women, right? It's not having emotions. It's not just women who look at rom-coms and think, I want something like Adam Brody, the hot rabbi. It's not that. It's very performative, that stuff, right? Oh, I love that show, by the way. I binge watched it. But I'm saying that it's more fundamental than that, right? So if you, beyond performative love, right? And it's not just your romantic partnerships, it's with your children, right? It's with your
Yeah.
friend, it's with your parents, it's with your sibling,
Yeah.
and the way you show up. And you want to show up from that place of, I'm not scared anymore, to own all parts of myself, and I'm finally ready to do that. Reach out to me, sangpath.com. You can book a 15-minute conversation, and then I offer a signature program where I work one-on-one with nervous systems. That's really the only way to do it. It's not like you'll have pre-recorded stuff to catch up on later, but because of the nuance and precise nature of this work, the deep transformation, I think, happens in that one-on-one space. So if you're interested, curious, just drop me a note, book a call, and let's talk.
Amazing. And then for me, I'm Khalil Guliwala. I'm the I produce content as a BIPOC Manager podcast. I also offer coaching services to visible minorities who sort of have a block in their career and trying to get to managerial or a senior leadership position. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Khalil Guliwala. All right. It was amazing
Yeah.
talking to you, Sangeeta.
And yeah, go watch the BIPOC Manager podcast. We've talked, but also there's some very good episodes in there. So great work, and recommended viewing for everybody.
Amazing. All right. Thank you, Sangeeta.